Hello and welcome back. For the purpose of this video, we're going to be talking about subjective ethical relativism. Ethical relativism. And if you recall, on our roadmap, subjective ethical relativism finds its place on the left-hand side of the column there, the left column. And basically this is the first of the two theories that we'll look at, that when you ask the question, do any universal moral principles exist, they answer it no. No, they don't believe in any overarching universal moral principle. It's not that they don't believe in morals necessarily. They both have a place for morality or for moral claims, but they don't believe that any of those moral claims are universally binding. That means that they're binding on everybody of all places and times and situations in history. But anyway, subjective ethical relativism is the first of the two. Subjective ethical relativism is also known as individual relativism. And that may be a little bit more helpful in understanding it, because basically subjective ethical relativism looks at the individual in what their personal opinion has to do of morality is. So the subjective ethical relativism, also known as individual relativism, is a theory that states that morality is a matter of personal opinion. That morality is simply a matter of personal opinion. Now, all of the other views that we will look at have a place for the notion that everybody has a different opinion on morality. However, subjective ethical relativism believes that that's all that there is. There is no overarching moral principle. There's no morality in the cosmos around us. There's no morality that society has a right to require of us, and so forth. That morality simply is a matter of a person's personal opinion. And basically this is the idea that what's good for you is good for you, and what's bad for you is bad for you. What's good for me is good for me, or what I say good is what's good for me. What I say is bad for me. And it varies from each individual. Each individual has their own opinion of morality, and there's nothing outside of that would require us or demand, or has any right to demand from us any kind of obedience. So that's subjective ethical relativism. David Hume was an Enlightenment philosopher who proposed a view that's related to this, subjective ethical relativism. He believed that basically what a person calls good, when they talk about a person being a good and moral person, really all that they mean is that they like that person, or they like their behavior, they like their belief system. When they call them immoral, then what they're really saying is that they don't like that person. And they aren't saying anything more than that. So what is moral devolves into that which you like. It's your personal preference. What is immoral devolves into that which you don't like, your personal, what we don't personally prefer. So that's subjective ethical relativism. Now this view has some interesting implications to it. And I think, on the one hand, I think we all recognize that everybody has a personal opinion when it comes to morals and ethics. I don't think that we could deny that. Certainly that is the case. But is that all there is to morality? I mean, that's really the question. Because if there's something else, whether that something else is society that has a right to tell us what to do morally, or whether that something else is God who tells us what to do, what we should believe and do, then if there's something else that requires or that demands or that has the right to be obeyed, morally speaking, then this view cannot be true. There's some interesting consequences, though, to believing or trying to espouse a moral relativism like subjective ethical relativism. And I think it's summed up best in one of my favorite speakers that I heard once upon a time. This has been many years ago, but the first time that I heard him speak, his name is Vodi Bakum, and he goes from colleges and universities and places, at least he used to. He was kind of an itinerant speaker. He would go to a college campus, and he would be there, and he would answer questions and give talks and things like this. anyway, I saw him the first time I saw him. He was giving a talk that was called The Ever-Loving Truth. The Ever-Loving Truth. And you got to know something about Vodi. Vodi is 6'2" or 3", so he's kind of a tall guy. He's also a big guy. He played college football. He was a lineman actually when he played, and he was very good at it. Big guy, real big guy. In fact, he also took up MMA fighting in an amateur way. He competed in amateur MMA. And was very successful with that as well. So he's kind of a big, kind of intimidating, loud kind of guy, but he's really a nice guy if you get to know him. But anyhow, the first time I heard him speak, I was at a college, and the talk was called The Ever-Loving Truth. And he was talking about this drift in society toward not just an ethical relativism, but just an epistemological relativism, the idea that you can never really know truth. And that idea is being propounded in many different facets of our society, and he was concerned about that, and so he was giving a talk about that. And one of the consequences associated with the idea that you cannot know truth objectively is that you cannot know moral truth objectively. And so he was addressing that in his talk. And he says, I go to these college campuses, and I talk to people who say that there's no such thing as truth, and there's no such thing as moral truth. What's good for you is good for you, and what's good for me is good for me. And that's how people want to try to live, and that's the view that they want to take. And he says, it gets sort of frustrating. He says, the next time I think I hear somebody say that, I'm just going to go and punch him in the face. And of course, he's a big guy, so the guy would probably feel it. So he says, and when they pick themselves up off the floor, and they ask me, why did you do that? I'm going to say, well, it felt good to me, so that's why I did it. It was good for me, so it was good, right? And then I'm going to look at them and I'm going to ask them, so do you still believe that what's good for you is good for you, and what's good for me is good for me? Do you still believe that there's no way for you to tell me that I'm wrong in a moral way? Do you still believe that there's no such thing as a moral truth? And he says, if they say, no, I don't believe that there's moral truth, I'm going to punch him again. Of course, I don't advocate that you go punching people that don't agree with you, and that wasn't really his point. He wasn't going to hit anybody. But the point was this, is that if you don't have a way to say to somebody that you should do this or you shouldn't do this, then how can we expect to have any sort of societal cohesion? Because if everybody just does what's right in their own eyes, then that can get kind of frightening, because some of the things that people want to do, some of the things that people consider good and right, aren't really good and right for everybody. And they can bring a lot of pain and a lot of heartache and this sort of thing. So that's one of the interesting consequences of espousing a view like subjective ethical relativism. When somebody, can we live consistently with it? One of the interesting things about this view is that you can't be wrong when it comes to morality. If you agree with subjective ethical relativism, that what you're saying basically is no one can be wrong when it comes to ethical claims or moral claims. And why not? Well, because you and I, we can't be wrong when we share our opinion, right? If I say, for example, I like Devil's Food chocolate cake. Okay, well that's fantastic. I'm glad you like Devil's Food chocolate cake. Maybe you don't like Devil's Food chocolate cake, and for you, your opinion is right for you, and for me, my opinion of the matter is right for me. Neither of us can be wrong because we're just there sharing our opinions. Well, if morals are nothing more than a matter of personal opinion, then that means that whatever you choose to do is right and good. You can't be wrong about your approach to morality, since it's only an opinion. And neither can I. I cannot be wrong about my opinion either. Now that creates a setting where makes it very difficult for people to live in close conjunction with one another in a society together, because everybody's going to be trying to doing their own thing, when some of the times what people want to do conflicts with others, or maybe even brings harm to others. So, or certainly discomfort. So anyway, that is a significant problem associated with this view. The notion that you cannot ever tell anybody that they're wrong because it's just an opinion. So anyway, those are some difficulties associated with this view. This view also has been accused by some of leading inexorably, or with mathematical certainty, leading to the view known as moral nihilism. And moral nihilism is the notion that there is no such thing as morals. Now, to be clear, subjective ethical relativism in and of itself does have a place for moral principles. It just says that that they're opinion. They're a matter of your opinion. Moral nihilism is the view that just full-blown says there's no such thing as morality. But is there really a difference between the two? It's sort of like a distinction without a difference. Because the only way that you can have a subjective ethical relativism where your opinion equals your morality, my opinion equals my morality, is if there's no if there is no morality at all for either of us to be obeyed, and so we can just choose to do whatever we want to. That is a practical moral nihilism if it's not actually spelled out, if the person doesn't just actually come along and say, yeah, well, I'm a moral nihilist, right? So in any case, that's subjective ethical relativism, individual relativism. Now imagine this. Imagine, one of the great tests of a worldview or of an ethical theory is if you can live that worldview consistently. And the question is on subjective ethical relativism, is it possible to live this view out consistently? Well, imagine what would happen if you tried. Imagine what would happen if you tried to live consistent with the notion that morals are only a matter of personal opinion. Think about what would happen to, for example, the justice system. Because the justice system depends upon laws being passed in order to enforce those laws, right? And ideally what happens is the justice system is made up of a part of government there that is enforcing the laws, and the laws are there and they have been created and formulated in such a way so as to provide for a smooth functioning society. And so there are laws against murder, there are laws against theft or stealing, there are laws against all kinds of assault, things like this. There are laws against these things because if everybody were doing these things, then society would not function very well. We would always be sort of in the state of nature, looking over our shoulder, wondering who's going to come and get us and take our stuff and assault us and harm us and so forth. And society really wouldn't be possible if we didn't have those laws in place. But I want you to notice something about every law ever made, ever passed, is this. Every single law that lawmakers have made or passed depends upon a moral basis. It presupposes a moral basis. So laws against murder presupposes the value of human life. Laws against theft presupposes the notion of property rights, and that's a moral issue. Laws against assault presuppose a person's freedom to go unhindered and uninjured, unharmed by others, and those are moral issues as well. Even something as mundane as a speed limit law, it has a moral basis that undergirds it. The moral basis for a speed limit law is basically that we value human life and human safety, and we understand that there are certain conditions on the road in a given context that if you were to exceed certain speed limits on that particular road, that it would make it very dangerous for the average well-maintained mechanical vehicle. It would make it dangerous for that to be operated faster at speeds faster than that. And so the law is passed in order to protect human life, in order to protect property rights, in order to protect safety. All of those things are moral principles that go into the passing of something as mundane as a speed limit law. And every law has a moral basis. Now, not every law has a good moral basis. Let's get that clear. Sometimes the laws have been passed both in the past and in the present that depend upon a moral basis that is highly flawed or dubious. However, all of them depend upon a moral principle that they're assuming that we as a society agree upon, and that will provide for a better functioning society. Now, if that is the case, if the justice system depends upon good and just laws being passed, and good and just laws depend upon a moral principle that they presuppose, then what happens when you say, hey, there are no such thing as moral principles? It's everybody's opinion. Everybody does what's right in their own eyes. You do you, I'll do me, and we'll just get along. Well, the problem is that we won't get along because we will have no laws. Laws are sort of the backbone of society. We'll have no society. Why not? Because we have nothing to base those laws on. We don't have a moral principle to base it on. Now, it may be possible for the majority of people who have the same moral opinion to pass the law, even though it doesn't have a moral basis. But really what we've done then is we have given ourselves over to what Francis Schaeffer calls the tyranny of the 51%. It's just the majority of people pushing their opinion on the minority of people. And how many times has that gone wrong throughout history? How many times in history has the majority, simply because they had the majority, impressed their will on the minority, and that turned out to be a terrible human rights violation and so forth. So anyhow, subjective ethical relativism has a lot of issues with it. And to be real honest with you, people who do not believe in a universal moral principle, they come to subjective ethical relativism and they're very uncomfortable with it. Not many philosophers have landed in this particular area. David Hume, maybe. Friedrich Nietzsche, maybe. There have been a handful of them throughout history who have said, hey, look, this is just the way it is. Others have gone on and said, okay, we don't agree that there's a universal moral principle. So we believe that that's the case. There's no such thing as a universal moral principle. However, we believe that individual societies have to formulate moral principles within that society that everybody in that society is expected to obey in order for there to be a properly functioning society. Because otherwise, if we don't have that, then society is going to devolve into anarchy and chaos. And so they'll move on to the next form of relativism that we'll look at in the next video, and that is conventional ethical relativism. It's the notion that individual cultures have their own moral codes, even though there's no universal moral principle binding them all together. But subjective ethical relativism is an interesting view, but it does imply, or it does have this sort of the consequence of a very dangerous context. Because if we have no basis for laws, we have no society. We have no basis for society. But that is subjective ethical relativism, also known as individual relativism, the notion that morals are a matter of personal opinion. All right, well, that does it for this video. We'll see you in the next one where we'll talk about cultural relativism or conventional relativism, same view, two different names. Thanks a lot. We'll see you then.